Really stellar speakers, and I'm hoping that the discussion ensuing is going to be really enriching. And it's our privilege and honor to have the opening plenary be moderated by K. Sujata, who is the head of the Chicago Foundation for Women, who's right here with us. Sujata.
Good morning, everyone. So it is indeed my honor, and congratulations, Shweta, on the first South Asian Womanhood and Girlhood conference. I am honored to moderate this opening plenary and to see all of you here. So as she said, my name is Sujata. I am the president and CEO of Chicago Foundation for Women. We support basic rights and equal opportunities for our region's women and girls. And every day I bear witness to the trials and triumphs that Chicago's women and girls experience. I'll tell you a little bit about myself before I begin moderating the panel, and a little bit about our work, just because it lays the context in which I live and work, and I think in which this conference, hopefully, as I read the agenda for the next 2 days, I think it sets the context. I was trained as an engineer and a scientist. I don't have a background in the practice of social work. In fact, some of my best work was done on cement and concrete. When I turned 40, I switched careers. Some people buy a fancy sports car. I decided to work for a nonprofit called Apnaghar. You'll hear from them a little bit later. Apnaghar works with immigrant battered women and their children. It is not a decision that I made with a great deal of deliberation or research, as many of the young women who come to me for advice and interest do. But it remains to this day one of the most transformative experiences of my life and career. I met Bollywood star activists who were out to change the world for women. I met women, South Asian women, who had been battered and bruised, yet held on to hope and were raising good children to be the best citizens for tomorrow. In interviews with journalists are often curious about my upbringing in India. I hear the assumptions in their questioning. There's always a bit of a surprise when I share that my father was encouraging of me and my sister that we could be anything we desired to be. In the West, there is still difficulty in understanding the rich and robust diversity of the East. Gender bias and gender-based violence is a global issue. We're aghast when we hear of a Bangladeshi living on less than $2 a day. But what about the nearly 1 in 4 US households led by women who earn a median annual income of only $20,000? Many mothers are reusing diapers and diluting baby formula to make ends meet. We were appalled when we read the news of a woman being gang raped in Delhi. But we only have to go as far as our college campuses or military bases for similar stories. The mortality rates of women diagnosed with breast cancer in Chicago, in certain parts of Chicago, are worse than in Nigeria. These numbers are twice as bad when you are in Chicago neighborhoods like Washington Heights, North Lawndale, or West Garfield Park. So we cannot say that these issues don't transcend boundaries and are not in our own backyards. We often hear about child marriages in other countries. You just heard statistics about that. But here in the United States and locally in Chicago, teen pregnancy continues to deeply impact girls' future and their economic security. About a quarter of teen moms have a second child within 24 months of their first baby. Children born to teens are more likely to be abused, neglected, and fall behind in school and have poor health outcomes. Those children are likely to be teen parents themselves. And Chicago Foundation for Women is committed to changing the narrative and the trajectory by building a stronger, safer metropolitan region for all women and girls. We are increasing investments in smart, women-led solutions. We're growing philanthropic leaders by encouraging young women and men to serve on nonprofit boards. We're accelerating movements for positive change. We collaborate and partner with others to define the changes that we want to see in our region. Last year, we launched a bold new initiative called the 100% Project. It is an all-out, all-in, partnership-driven effort to end gender bias in our region and increase economic security for women by the year 2030. Why should we care about bias? You're going to be talking about this for the next 2 days, I presume, just in looking at the topics being covered. Biases are embedded in the very structures in which we work, pray, live, and eat. It has caused unimaginable harm to our society, taking the lives of young black men and women to the everyday loss of income for women and families because they're paid less. We're held back from progress and success when we leave large segments of our population behind. When we clear the pathway for women and girls to succeed, and that means full access to opportunities for advancement, freedom from violence, and quality healthcare, whole communities succeed, whether it is here in our own backyard or whether it is in South Asia. It seems like a daunting endeavor, but in leading Chicago Foundation for Women, I have seen the work and success in action. The panel here, and indeed the conference, will provide some of the best solutions happening here and in South Asia. You will hear about the range of issues to change the conditions for women and girls, including violence, politics, political representation, leadership, education, health, mental health, the arts, and indeed the environment. So let us begin. Let me give you a few instructions to get off the ground. I will introduce each speaker, and they will each have 10 minutes to give their remarks, except for Catherine and Marcia, who have 15 minutes. Don't ask me why. I'm just providing instructions. I ask that the audience write down your questions. Although this is a fairly small group, so maybe I'll be able to, when I come back on to moderate the question part, you'll be able to ask your questions without having to write them down. But write them down so that at the end you can ask them. We'll have a bit of time at the end. If we run out of time, I think many of the speakers will be available during lunch to respond to your individual questions. So let us begin with Catherine Raymond. And please forgive me, I have to use my little tablet because I wasn't able to print their bios. So Catherine Raymond is the director at the Center for Burma Studies at Northern Illinois University. As an art historian, she's focused on art in Burma, and you'll see her slide up here. And she has extended her work from Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and as an art historian and an archaeologist. She's also an educator who has been interacting with a lot of Burmese universities and museums. So please welcome Catherine.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me. I'm a Southeast Asianist by training, but in fact, I was trained in La Sorbonne in Paris, as you can hear with my accent. And as I said to my students, I'm coming from another world, and I'm going to take you to another universe with my French accent. Everything you will hear about Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka will be with my French accent. So I'm coming from Asian studies with Tagore in my childhood and teenager years. And so it was really, when I was 15, I was already predestined to take over Asian studies because of the philosophy of Tagore. I was extremely, and still today, extremely touched by his whole writing. I was also trained and loved Satyajit Ray. And so for me, all the movies didn't start with Bollywood, but with Calcutta and the Bengali culture. I trained by French archaeologist and art historian. I started doing excavation in Sri Lanka for 5 years. I met my husband in Bangladesh when I was doing my field research on Buddhist sites in southern Bengal and Bangladesh. I married him in Bhutan. My first trip to India was through Pakistan, Afghanistan, years ago, when I was, like some of you, a student. And I'm still continuing to work a lot with Indian. But it was very weird for me to be invited by Shweta to do something which was not on Southeast Asia. So it was forcing me to do what I'm doing with my students, usually on a fall semester, India and Southeast Asian art, looking at what women have been doing within the region, but in art, it's my specialty. I just came back from Duke University, where I was speaking about contemporary art. And last summer, I interviewed a few of them, and I'm going to share with you the experience I had with a few contemporary women in Myanmar. By the way, there have been a new government, and Aung San Suu Kyi is the leader of the country. So I'm even more pleased to be part of this woman. And so maybe in a few months we'll do the same here, but I'm not voting, so I don't know. So it's it's on your part to do the best for you, for the country. Okay, let me just start. So Myanmar woman artists emerging from isolation and censorship. Okay, let me make sure I can advance. Yes. Okay, so with Myanmar opening in 2011, after 50 years of military regime, suddenly Burmese artists are exploiting the internet to discover the larger artistic world. In a stressful transitional period, how do Burmese women artists particularly negotiate expectation of accommodating to traditional religious cultural roles? In 2015, just last year, we started to see emerging, after 50 years of dictatorship and heavy censorship, contemporary trends focusing on women discussion with Myanmar women artists who play a major role in changing the society. I will come back on some of these women. Here are some of the women I interviewed. My focus was not especially on women, so it was a little bit of a challenge, but I will tell you my experience with some of them. But all of these women are from the age of 70 to the age of 20. And so they are really having a great opportunity now to be able to, through their work, to do community service and to be active in the education of young women and girls. Just in case of you don't know where is Myanmar, because for me I said, well, how big is the border? So you have all this border between in India, but this is with, of course, Naga, the Chin, which are this borderline, and so Manipur, of course, in the north. So it's really very important with the Arakan here, and I've been especially focusing in part of my PhD in this region. So that's why I am quite familiar on both sides of the border. But it was more 6th century, so it was a little bit more ancient than today. Okay, so just a brief, and I will be 2 minutes on it. After the colonization by the British, which started in 1824, ended in 1947, the country gained the independence. During 10 years, got this privilege of being proactive in establishing different rules. Women at that time really negotiated pretty well a large part of the education and social activism. Women are the first writing we have in Burma is 14th century poems by women. So women in a Burmese society before the military regime was extremely strong. Girls have been educated, and this has been changing with 50 years of military regime, and disappeared, as one of the leader artists told me. So in 1962 till 2010, well, with 2010, the military regime was exerting its full power under Ne Win. I was at the university living in a chummery with women students for preparing my PhD in 1983. Sorry for the young students who were not born at that time. Went back in 85 after going to Bangladesh and making connection with Sri Lanka and Bangladesh for my research, and in 1987. So at that time, the military regime was really a full blast, and I was checked at every corner where I was going. So in 2010, election came, and in 2011, the Monitoring Act, Library, Museum and Exhibition Monitoring Act, as we call, was really stopped. But it was established in 1964. We know a lot about the press and the censorship about the press, less about art. And the censorship was extremely heavy on women. But the society and the military were even stronger than the military regime in prohibiting women to exercise their art. So in 2011, 2016, we see emerging a transitional government which authorizes internet access, what I called open access. And that changed quite a lot. I forgot to mention during this time, you have in 1988 an uprising of the student movement, which put together a lot of students under, not house of arrest, but under jail. They flew the country. They went either to India or to Thailand. And some of the women were jailed, and I will talk a little bit about it. So I'm really very happy to say in 2015, Aung San Suu Kyi wins the election, and for the first time, a democratic government was elected. She cannot be the president, but she is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the State Councillor, and she is really the president, not in title, but in the shadow of this government, because she was married to a British scholar. I'm going to focus on a few of these women who really fought for their rights. Matenji is one of the major women artists in Myanmar, like in the Indian subcontinent. Women artists are also writers, and they are very active in various aspects. So Matenji, through her work, was really one of the first trying to understand how she could be an artist, and got the support from, exactly like you said, Sujata, from the family to be able to be an artist. Because she was from an era where they could help her to raise some issues. She was the first one to advocate for women artists within the male world, and that led to Cho In-ten, which I interviewed. She came to NIU, she came to the School of the Art Institute, And she graduated in 1994, but at an early age, she was recognized as a wonderful artist. Meanwhile, she was arrested with one of the other students, Tan Lin, and started doing performance. So she was jailed for 5 days. And here what you see is a performance where the family sent her abroad because it was too dangerous for her. And she thought she would be more active outside. Here she is duplicating being part of all the those who were jailed. For the head, she made the people living the figure of other head prisoners, or hands on her arms and same on their legs. She collaborated and still collaborates. She is in the US part of the time and still very active in defending education for women. Another important artist who has been advocating under the censorship, and you see here a nude, it's Sanda Kine. She's really a fantastic woman who, for the first time, had an exhibition on nude, where the censorship act, the monitoring act, was not only prohibiting everything bizarre, but nude was not allowed. Everything compromising law and order in a society was prohibited, to avoid chaos, to avoid decent voice coming from NA France, especially reinforced after 1988. So every morning when you had an exhibition, especially after 1988, you had a group of censors arriving and just questioning, quizzing the artist. What is this? What is the title of it? Well, you cannot not have the title. So sometimes they change the title to Untitled, which was the title of the painting. In this case, in the first exhibition, they asked her to cover the breast and the lower part of the body. What was interesting even more about this artist is she just created this kind of gaze and just covered it, and that was accepted only abroad, but not in Burma. What is also an interesting aspect of her education was also the fact all of this nude, she couldn't find any model. So her mother stepped in. And really, so this is interesting motherhood and girlhood attitude. When the mother couldn't sit for modeling, the sister did that. And so here is one of the series with a camera, nude with camera, where she had it. Here you see the naked truth, which she criticized the regime, and this is a powerful green representation. Well, as I mentioned, a mother and a sister. Here is what is interesting, if you know Burmese, it's a newspaper, The Mirror, which was really the least trusted and most unreliable, and she put that in the hands of the women doing their daily life activities, but provoking a conversation with women bodies, which of course was never the case before. Okay, so I'm just going to go. Another woman who was very active in the change of environment, and I think there are a lot of concern, and the movement of women in Burma these days are coming from these women who are proactive in the conservation of the environment. And Khin Tanpyu is really one of the main activists with all these women you see here. In the past, women could not really push new ideas because of the tension surrounding their presence in the art world, but today it's totally different. She is speaking about the art changing in 2015. There are more women with different ideas. Such as Pumon, who experiment the prohibition of doing anything outside of male world. You couldn't be part of the male world and painting outside. So women today react about this representation of women, such as this Nue Nue, she's the oldest one I interviewed, with Locanat and Peace. Just Nguele, she is only 24 and speaking about the past and the change and the transition happening today. And this is probably the most interesting, is this woman criticizing the heavy load of dressing for wedding, where more and more young women want pearls, and the weight is 24 pounds. And so she makes a metaphor between the wedding ceremony and the load on women, on Burmese women these days. So the last is this Mae. She was born in 1985, who did a performance in a small cell with red light, speaking about menstruation, a taboo. So that was in October 2015. So you see a radical change in the society in Burma, giving voice again to women, where she was chairing a ginger, supposed to be a wonderful drink for during the pain of menstruation. And I will stop here because so I think this is probably the most powerful one.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm sure we all have a lot of questions for her, so I'm sure, please write them down. But let me now introduce Anne Carlisle, Dr. Anne Carlisle. She's a great friend of mine and also one of the co-founders of the South Asian American and Policy Institute. During her day job is as the Great Lakes Regional and Chief Executive of the U.S. General Services Administration. She is the first woman to serve as the regional administration for this particular administration in this region. She's also taught interdisciplinary courses on Asian Americans and continues to serve as the director, as the chair of the South Asian American Policy and Research Institute. Please welcome my friend Anne Carlisle.
Good morning. Can you get on the internet?
Yeah, I don't know. Who is the IT person? I'm a Mac person, so I will not touch.
Oh, there you go.
Did you have a presentation?
No, I did not have a presentation,
Okay.
but I just wanted to make the connection to art. So that's what I'm just going to do. So good morning, and as I'm doing this, I'm hoping I want to show off my multitasking talents here. So good. Thank you so much, Sujata. I almost wanted to yield my time to Catherine for doing that. What a fantastic presentation, and just to learn about art. First, let me just really thank Dr. Shweta Singh for, being a real shiro, for doing, to be able to take this task of organizing the very first South Asian Womenhood and Girls Conference at Loyola University. So let's just give her and her team a round of applause. That in itself shows leadership, and that in itself, when you're a pioneer at something, it's just really quite amazing. And to bring together a fantastic panel here and having, one of my heroes, Sujata, as a moderator in itself is just really a pleasure to be here. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, to personalize this, a little bit about my own journey, and then talk, sort of, my topic is a little bit light, but really talk about, what is it that, as women, that we need to overcome. And first of all, thanks to the men who are here to support us as well, right? As Sujata said, I'm the regional administrator for a federal agency, which is the United States General Services Administration. It's an unknown agency. We like to be that way because we do work. We're sort of a shared services agency. There are three things that we do. We provide workspace for the second largest sort of employer here in the Chicago metropolitan area with 55,000 federal employees here. So in my region alone, which I oversee, I have close to 35 million square feet of both owned and leased properties that we manage. Secondly, we also do acquisitions, about $4 billion worth of acquisitions that we have done, last year. And that is, we set up contracts for agencies to buy anything from a pencil to power. And the third thing that we just recently started was technology. We started a third line of business called Technology Transformation Services. In fact, yesterday we announced the commissioner for that, who's based out in DC, who came from Pixar. So we're really excited about it. Because of what we do, we play a very instrumental role in making government transparent to serve the American people. We make government green so that government can reduce its costs, as well as in helping to change the way we ourselves work. So I got to this position about 6 years ago. I worked 18 years at the University of Chicago, was very happy there, and got a call from the White House asking that if I would serve. I had no idea what GSA was. I had to immediately look it up, and I said, I'm really not that interested, but I was firmly told that when you're called to serve, you serve, right? And it's been a real pleasure, and I feel very honored to be one of the 3,000 appointees by the Obama administration to head the GSA here in the region. But how that happened is because of the sort of trajectory of, we all sort of, in some ways, you're tapped, you're not an active agent, but in some ways, it just sort of happens. So, and I'm gonna, Colleen here and I have been partners in crime. My father and my mom came here in the mid-50s. This is prior to the Civil Rights Act, and my dad came here because he got a scholarship to teach. To go to school here at Loyola University. And one of the things that he did with a group of people is they founded a political organization. And so when I went and got my PhD and came back and I was actually working on my dissertation, my mother basically just said, your dad is getting out of this political organization and you are getting in. And I'm like, just really didn't want to be part of it, right? Because I had seen our house was open house. My parents were, my dad's a social worker and my mom just, they just, invited and welcomed everybody into our house. I go to the first meeting, which is on Devon Avenue, and one of the Patel brothers behind and some of you'll know this, and I look in this room, it's dark, and it's sort of really seedy looking, and it almost looks like as if the mafia, the Indian mafia, the South Asian mafia is getting together there. And I was just like, and I looked across and I found, some comfort because I saw Colleen, Colleen was also there. And I realized that as the only South Asian woman in that organization, and also as perhaps someone who was a little bit younger than most of the, people that I had been referring to as uncles, I was feeling a little insecure, right? And all of a sudden so I, quietly raised my hand. You remember saying, how come we don't have a women's division? They said, fine, you go ahead and you lead it. So I said, okay, all right. But eventually, and I give you this example, eventually what I had to do was to prove myself. That as someone that I could raise funds, I could bring in members, I could, by collaborating with people like Colleen and others, bring out the community, register them to vote. And so I ended up getting into this sort of political sphere where you hardly saw any South Asian women involved in. And that became something that I did on the side, and that became a passion for me. And I realized that not only that women are not represented, but rather the fact that, we are not in this sphere. And if we stay away from this sphere, what happens is that, we will never be present, right? Our voices will never be heard. It doesn't have to be a big P or a small p. And so it is in this space that I had the really pleasure of meeting our president, President Obama, who was teaching at the University of Chicago part-time, but he was a state senator. And as we got to meet over lunch and talk, I realized that I was instantly connected to his intelligence, his vision, and his passion for community empowerment. And so we became, I worked with him and trying to get him to know communities that he typically would not have gotten to know. And as part of that friendship and partnership is how I ended up being appointed to the General Services Administration. So when I got to GSA, and as Sujata said, I'm the first woman, first Asian American woman, first South Asian American, the first of so many, right? In a field, because I also have an undergraduate in computer science, and so therefore I have this, and I have a PhD in history, and so I kind of have like these two spaces that are at two, sort of bipolar in some ways, right? And so I get to GSA and I realize that 800 some employees, mostly all men in leadership. And I had the opportunity to be able to hire the next tier of 2 women. So now there were 3 of us. So the question, I tell you this because as women, how do you become comfortable in this space that sometimes you end up having, right? And what happens when women are in leadership? Are we building that pipeline, right? Are you all building the pipeline? Are you bringing others with you? One of the things about most of our South Asian sort of organizations, particularly and I think I can say this, South Asian organizations, whether it's, social service or whether it's, advocacy or whether it's issue-oriented, what we're finding in these boards is that you have not too many of the women, young women, or not too many younger people being brought in. That pipeline is not there. And when they come together, there is this conflict with regards to, trying to sort of help the organization. So I spoke yesterday for an hour at Northeastern, so I can go on forever.
1 minute.
I have 1 minute, okay. So just a few points. It's really important, right, to be able to make sure that we have that pipeline. It's really important also to mentor. So when I got to GSA, one of the things I noticed is that, so we put together a mentoring program. But what we did was, mentoring is a very strange concept, right? Because it's in some ways very unequal, right? And it's always up to the person who's the mentee to initiate. And so what we did was we added a reverse mentoring component to it so that both people were going to be learning together. And so many actually people jumped at that. So mentoring is important. And then, lastly, there are always assumptions about who we are and what we do, right, as women, and, and how can we challenge those assumptions? I'll tell you one quick story and then I'll end. I have been for the last year or so working on developing a concept in technology and workplace. Pretty much it's a concept and a model for integrating. When we do workplace design, we do not integrate technology into it. It's not being done in government. It's not being done in the private sector as well. We do it as it's a thought afterwards. So I've been working on developing this model. I go to a conference in San Diego, present twice. I go to Philadelphia, I present there on this, well received. I'm sitting with a group of thought leaders in this space, and we're introducing, and as we were talking, and somebody mentions it, immediately, I'm the only woman in this, circle of, 4 or 5 people. This thought leader turns around and goes to the 2 men who are part of my team and says, "So tell me more about it," right? And I immediately just started to laugh, but I didn't say anything. And so I was waiting for them to say, oh, you should talk to Ann. You know, she actually, Ann, can you please? And what do you think they did? They started talking about it. And so finally I had to interject myself in a very sort of, you know, diplomatic way and say, let me give you a little bit about the history of this. And that's how I interjected myself. But boy, in the back of my head, this very colorful stuff was coming out, right? That happens daily. It happens daily, you know, on a basis to almost all of us, right? And so we need to push ourselves to be able to claim our space, to stand in our voice, and to be able to be as women as leaders. And I just wanted to say that, you know, this conference is really a vehicle in normalizing women as leaders, in normalizing the fact that women are so underrepresented in almost every area. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Ann.
And the last thing is, when you get a chance, take a look at this. This is one of my lovely projects, and I just wanted to make that continuity to art here. We have the largest public art collection in the country that is held by us. I made this online because it's not accessible to the public. So if you get a chance, take a look at it, www.gsa.gov/FA. Thank you.
Thanks. So look it up. And the URL is right on top there if you can see it, gsa.gov/FA. Fine art, I think this stands for. Great. So we now move on to Craig Mackey, who is the CEO of Asian Human Services. Craig joined Asian Human Services as its CEO in 2015. Before that, he served as the Chief Operating Officer of Christopher House and was also the founder of the Maryville Gen School, offering therapeutic learning and a therapeutic learning environment for the students who live with emotional, behavioral, and cognitive disabilities. Please welcome Craig.
Hello. I don't think do I have anything? I don't think so either. So I started with Asian Human Services about 18 months ago, and I always like to tell folks, because as I'm learning and coming into transition to this, when I first started the job, I went to meet with Jan Schrakowsky, the congresswoman, and I sat down and we were kind of looking at each other, and she offered me a Jolly Rancher, and I didn't know what to do with that because I thought she was setting me up with candy in my mouth. And my mom always said, you don't do that when you talk to people. And then she looked at me and she said, CEO of Asian Human Services, how's that going for you? And until that point, I never really thought about being a white guy working at an organization named Asian Human Services, and in the reality, it didn't dawn on me until several weeks into the job that, you know, we work with nearly 27,000 people from over 50 countries on an annual basis. We have a staff of a little over 200 individuals that speak anywhere between 30 to 40 languages. So as one of, and I think maybe the only monolingual white guy in the whole place, I feel like a fish out of water sometimes. And so what I learned, and why I tell you that, is because when I came in, what I recognized is I'm a social worker, that's what I do, but and that's where I started. But I got into all of this and moved up because I really liked the business side of social worker. And I think what Shweta had invited me here was, I think for us to be able to do and provide services moving forward, we've got to get a lot smarter as social workers and business providers in how we look at back office services and how we integrate technologies and how we do all this, because it's wonderful to care a lot and to do a lot of the services, but if you can't make payroll and you can't keep the lights on, it doesn't matter. And this state has put us in a pretty tough predicament this year, and I don't see it getting incredibly better anytime coming. So we've got to get smarter at what we do. And so as an agency, we've set out to kind of look at this with its entirety of, we believe you need to be healthy, educated, and employed to stand a chance. And if you're missing any one of those three, things start to fall through the cracks. And so as an agency, we have, under our health department, we have federally qualified healthcare centers, womb-to-tomb care and service there, from OBGYN, pediatrics, family practitioners, psychiatry, you name it, I'm forgetting some. They're all there. We also have a full mental health program, child and adolescent. We've begun school intervention services, so we work out of those models. And we're really trying to change the paradigm that people don't need to come to us, we'll come to you. And this notion that because we have a facility or we have a site makes us more important, when the reality is we as practitioners need to figure out how to bring our services to folks. And so we're trying to change that paradigm within the health spectrum. We also have education, and believe highly in that. K through 8 charter schools, early childhood, adult education, GED, ESL, computer classes, a lot of the things that a lot of folks use and do. And so we're working in this idea of a continuum of care to be able to take care of folks, so that once you come into Asian Human Services, it doesn't matter what door you came through, whether it's through our clinics or the school or through our employment program for both youth and adults. We put nearly 750 people back to work last year, disabilities, you name it, that once you come in, you get everything. Right? And it's our job as agency providers to really evaluate all of the multiple barriers that are going on. And I think for me, so now as a guy that's coming in and sort of looking at this, one of the things that was troubling to me as I wanted to learn more about what was going on is we had all these wonderful services. 1,400 women last year through the Illinois Breast and Cervical Cancer Program came through, got all of the services. And so I started listening to the stories of the folks in the clinic, and what was killing me was there were women telling us, well, I never came because what was the point, right? Just because what was I going to do? If I learned if I had cancer, I don't have any options. And the reality is you do. And as I look at and women transitioning into this country and so forth, health's not a privilege, it's a right. You have the right to be healthy, and we can do things about that. And so I hear other stories of we have women coming to us and saying, well, part of the reason that we don't do preventive care is because that's sort of like testing fate, right? It was meant to be. And I'm like, what? That's what happens, I think, sometimes when you're in situations where you don't have the opportunity to get health care, to get some of that preventive screening, and you have to find peace with it, and you resolve it to, it must have been fate. But it's different here. And so I think this conference is awesome because I don't get it, right? I can see it, I can learn it, but I don't know what it's like to live life as an immigrant woman coming here. But I think that the two come together in that we have to be open and listen. And so some of my staff are here and they're going to present. I want to listen and I want to learn, but then at the same time we've got to build an organizational structure that actually can support the outreach. Otherwise it's a lot of conferences and it's a lot of talk, but we don't actually get to the getting women to these services and what are we going to do about it. And so it's a delicate balance, and it takes a lot of different lenses to look through, but I think these are some important steps because you only know what you know. And if we don't know where the problems are, it's very hard to put together the solutions and to figure out how we're going to support them moving forward. So thank you, and thank you for having me here.
Thank you. It is now my great pleasure to welcome Colleen Sen, who is an author and culinary historian. That sounds like really a fun thing to do. She is the author of many articles and 6 books on South Asian food. Let me just tell you about a couple of them. Food Culture in India, Curry, A Global History, Turmeric, The Wonder Spice, and many more. Please welcome Colleen.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Shweta, for inviting me to this really interesting conference. It's so diverse, and my talk may be the most diverse at all, because I will tell a little bit about myself, because everybody asks about it, how I got into being a culinary historian. And this is not writing cookbooks. It's studying the history of food and its social and cultural meaning. It's a really growing field. We have a very active culinary historians group here in Chicago. And my own discipline is Slavic languages. I won't had another career, but my husband basically is Indian. And like Anne, he moved back and forth between academia and government, which is how I got involved in this backroom political organization she talked about. And my husband's very interested in food. He's Bengali, a great cook, and his mother was a very famous food writer, Arati Sen. At one time, she had the most widely read column in India. So I was never really particularly interested in Indian food until I met him, but then I gradually got to be interested in it, and I started writing, even while I had a full-time job, articles for magazines, the Chicago Tribune, and then people asked me to start writing books, and once you write one book, they ask you to write more. My last book is called Feasts and Fasts, A History of Food in India. It's only the second history of Indian food written, which is astonishing, of this great cuisine. And it was republished in India. It was just earlier this year, and it's just doing tremendously well in India. There's such interest in the history of food in India. There's groups, and there's Facebook pages and websites. So I'm going to be going in a couple of weeks. I'm speaking at some meetings and may go back. So that's kind of my interest in Indian food. And I'm going to talk really a little bit about cookbooks today in India, because that's kind of an interesting topic. Now, when Shweta called me, I just finished making lunch, and it was really a pretty simple lunch. It was a Bengali dish called shukto with some dal, and I don't usually cook. My husband is a great cook, and if we cook together. We very rarely make Indian food. We do everything under the sun. But after making this simple meal, I was absolutely exhausted. I really had to lie down. And I thought, because Indian food is very labor-intensive, much more than other cuisines. So I found some statistics that the average Indian spends more time cooking than any other country in the world, an average of 13.2 hours a week, compared with between 5 and 6 hours a week in most developed countries and also in China. This was really astonishing, the lowest time spent cooking was in Korea. I don't know why that would be, 1.7 hours a week. So I don't know whether Koreans eat out a lot but that was a very interesting statistic. And then there's a lot of studies going on now of biodiversity in India, and I think the next speaker is going to talk about that. And so a lot of food in rural areas isn't cultivated or harvested. It's basically uncultivated food. And again, the study was done in Bangladesh and Tamil Nadu, and they found that as much as 60% of the food eaten in this village in Bangladesh was uncultivated. It was things like greens, SAWG. There was like nearly 80 different kinds of greens that were grown. There was roots and tubers. There was leaves. There was little fish that grow in the rice fields. There was mollusks and all sorts of items that were just collected by these women. And were a very important part of the diet because they also are very high in vitamins and minerals. So when you think about the time, the figure I quoted earlier was just time spent cooking. When you think of how much time people in rural India must spend gathering food, it's tremendous. And one of my beefs with anthropologists is how little attention they have paid to what is the most important activity in any rural area: preparing, gathering, collecting food. Maybe because they're men, they go into kinship relations, things like that. But this is such an important part of life, and it's really takes a lot of time. Now, when I wrote my history of Indian food, I really found very little information about how and what women actually cooked. And I'm assuming that in the past all the domestic cooking was done by women. And I don't want to get into the whole issue of the place of women in Indian society. It's a very complex and a politically sensitive issue. But if you look at the Dharma Shastras, the Dharma Sutras, it does seem that a woman's main job was to take care of her household. And there's one quote from the law book of Manu, says of a woman, she should always be cheerful and skillful in her domestic duties, with her household vessels well cleaned and her hand tight in the purse strings. The virtuous wife should ever worship her Lord as a god. Now, this is the theory. Whether this would happen in practice, I don't know. I mean, what is in the books isn't always what happens. So, but that's the model. That's the ideal. But an interesting footnote, I just mentioned that in Panini, we did find that there were women working as professional cooks, and this was around the 4th century BCE, and they were paid according to the volume of the food that they cooked. So there was apparently at one point a professional class of women cooks. And then if we look at the texts, at the great epics, we see in the Mahabharata that Bhima, one of the Pandava brothers, he was famous for his cooking prowess, and he even disguised himself as a cook at the court of a king. And then we have the mythical Nala, and he was the king of Nishada, and he is supposed to be the author of the first Indian cookbook called the Pakashastra, the science of cooking. And even today, in North India, professional cooks are sometimes called Maharaj, and this comes from this king Nala. And the term Nalapaka is a term that means food of excellent quality. And you'll find restaurants, even in the US, called Nalapaka. And there's even a popular TV cooking show in India called that. So we see a lot of attention paid to men as cooks in the literature, and not much about women, the domestic cooks. Now, if we look at collections of recipes, and it's really you can't really call them cookbooks, because they basically list ingredients, but they don't tell you how much, how long to cook it. But we find there's two categories of these, and one are the Ayurvedic doctors, the Ayurvedic physicians, and this is a major source of information for anyone writing about the history of Indian food. And in India, food and medicine are virtually interchangeable. An Ayurvedic physician will, diagnose you and prescribe certain foods and certain herbs and things like that. But what's important, and there's so much nonsense written about Ayurveda, it has nothing to do with your virtue. And there's even, and you can eat meat, even alcohol. If you look at charaka, you have what pairings you should have, garlic, onions. There's nothing to do with this sattvic, abstaining from these things. And there's even a very famous quote that the purpose of Ayurveda is not to create dharma, to help you achieve dharma, it's to make you healthy. So it's totally distinct from other theories of health in India, of which there are many. The second collection of these rudimentary recipes were put together by kings or their courtiers. And in my book, I really have a lot of information about this. There's the Manasolasa. It was composed in Sanskrit verse by King Somasvara III in Western India. This was in the 12th century. There was a Sanskrit treatise written at the court of a Rajput ruler. There was the Supashastra by the Jain ruler of a state in Karnataka. And it's interesting, it's vegetarian, but the recipes still do call for onion and garlic. And it also was directed at housewives, which is very interesting, since the others were really more a record of what was eaten at the court of the kings. And then there's my favorite, which is the Nimitnama, which some of you may know. And it was written in the 15th century by Giyat Shah, who was the Sultan of Mandu, which is a small state in central India. And when he ascended the throne, he said he didn't want anything to do with ruling his kingdom. He wanted to devote himself to a life of pleasure. And so he commissioned, and that included food. So he commissioned this beautiful book. He commissioned 50 paintings, and they all depict him supervising the preparation of various dishes. And these dishes are very elaborate. They involve very rare ingredients like camphor, musk, ambergris, a lot of saffron. And in the pictures, you can, and I wish I didn't bring any slides, but you can see that the people preparing them were both men and women that were preparing in the court. So I decided to try a couple of these recipes. So I asked my friend Marcia, because the recipes were written in Persian and Urdu, but there was an English translation. But often these translations aren't very good. I don't think the translators are cooks. And Marcia is also an excellent cook. So we tried to make a couple of these recipes for our husband. I think we made a meat dish with camphor and a rice dish. They were okay, but I don't think Sultan would have enjoyed them very much. But it was an interesting experiment. There's a lot of explanations about why there isn't very much traditional Indian writing about food. I won't go into that. It's a very interesting topic. But basically, just to conclude, that the first kind of serious cookbooks were written in the 19th century by these English women. These were these manuals for mem-sabs to tell the other English women how to cook or how to manage their servants, that sort of thing. And the first cookbook written in India by an Indian in an indigenous language seems to, and published, I should say printed, not just written, seems to be 1879 by an anonymous Bengali woman, and it was called Pakrabanda. So this was kind of an interesting first. Now, of course, there's thousands of cookbooks in the market. Everybody and their brothers, their sisters writing a cookbook. And the three that were really revolutionary in the 60s were Look and See on Tamil cookery, Mrs. Matthews' book on Kerala, and then Mrs. Balbir Singh's Indian cookery, which I still think is the best Indian cookbook ever written. It's level of Julia Child, very challenging but very good. And now, not only do we have many cookbooks, there are Indian chefs, women chefs, at some of the five-star hotels. They're doing cooking, not just cooking shows, but they're professionals. So it's kind of going back to the 4th century BC when you had professional Indian cooks. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Can you just thank Kaushik over there? He sponsored our lunch. He's from Hakabaka Rolls. Kaushik and Hakabaka Rolls.
Well, thank you. I see food has arrived, so thank you, Kaushik, from Hakabaka Rolls for sponsoring the food. We are going to enjoy it very much in just a few minutes. Thank you so much. So it came at an appropriate time, just as we were talking about food, and I don't know if it was inevitable that at a South Asian Womanhood and Girlhood conference we would talk about the law, the Book of Manu, but I thought that was pretty interesting. That I think it was inevitable in some ways, perhaps. It is now my great pleasure to welcome Soma Roy, who's at Siemens and promoting sustainability and STREAM to address achievement gaps. She has a master's in electrical engineering and is working towards her GRI certification. So environmental justice is a big part of economic justice, and it's a big part of reproductive justice, especially when it comes to women. So I'm very pleased to welcome Sharma.
Well, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure for me to be here. I take every opportunity to come learn. And in context, I think, maybe you shouldn't. I don't have much to say compared to all the other authors. But thank you, Anne. I think it's really wonderful that Loyola's mission is to expand in the service of humanity in terms of justice and faith. So I like the title, Identities in Transition, investing in the well-being of South Asian women and girls. I am one, so voila. So as far as transition is concerned, I think timely, this says Tamasho Ma Jyotirgamaya, from darkness to light, the transition of going from ignorance to wisdom. I think it's very appropriate in terms of Diwali. So happy Diwali to everyone, and salam alaikum, and hello to everyone. So the reason I bring this up in terms of biodiversity, that is an abiding passion of mine, and I'm very proud to say that South Asia has a tremendous heritage in it. If you look at it, I'm a dog lover, but that's not the reason this picture is up there. That's celebrating Tihar in Nepal, which is their version of Diwali, and they honor biodiversity. They acknowledge dogs and cats and crows, and I think that's very important, because now I think the rock star environmentalist is the Pope, coming in a Jesuit Catholic church. It does really matter, because you need to have faith and stewardship commingling together. And then I would like to say, it just happened to be serendipity. Did we know that, Jahangir, I think the Muslim art and the art that Catherine talked about, he was a naturalist. His influence was his grandfather, Babur. The middle guys are what everybody knows, Akbar and Shah Jahan, right? But if you look at it, the predominant thing that I want you to see and hear is the dodo bird. That is not endemic in India. So somebody actually bought a dodo bird here to have the painter Mansoor paint it. And then if you look over to the one painting on the left, it's cranes, right? My beloved cranes, and there's a reason they're beloved to me. There were plethora of them like 400-500 years ago in India. Unfortunately now, they don't exist. They used to fly, if you look at the pattern, they used to fly from way up north, go across Afghanistan down to Bharatpur in India. The last sighting of them was in 2001, 2002, a pair of them. And I think that's a shame. And I dislike this term of stewardship of the earth. Who deemed us the master of it? We should be commingling in mutual harmony with our species. There's almost 12, 13 million of them. mean, who decried us, one species, to be the planetary wisdom to guide it? We fail miserably. That's my own personal views, right? So if you look forward, you see these cranes there, right? Interestingly enough, just as a tidbit, because I take this opportunity to let people know, find things that you're interested in and research it, right? The cranes are also not flying in. They fly over the DMZ zone, North and South Korea. And I think what you may not know is conservation diplomacy, because the DMZ zone is one of the greatest biodiversity hotspot, because we don't do anything there, right? So the cranes used to fly to North Korea, stopped flying there because of lack of growth of their seeds that they used to. And so now there's a whole group, a brilliant group, the International Crane Foundation. Hall Healy is a wonderful man to know. They spend money to grow these farms in North Korea, so the cranes will fly there. And inevitably, they actually have dialogue across North and South Korea. It's a lovely way of getting started. Now, back to my cranes. I am sure anybody who's been to India is very familiar with this site of cranes in the farm. I would like to draw your attention to the other plethora of the creatures we find in the farm. Because, you know, outside the monoculture or the bigger agribusiness in the Western, in third world, most farms are small farmers. Majority of them are women. Like in terms of size, the average South Asian farm is about 1.5 hectares. In Canada or US, they're in hundreds of hectares. So the majority of the backbreaking work that is done are by women. This may be of interest to you in terms of, sure, oh, it's so poetic, but imagine the amount of work that goes into it. Because some people see it, oh my God, what a cool picture, but that is not the view that I would like to share. What I would bring to consensus, you can look it up. In the last 10 to 15 years, there's a plethora, there's the numbers out there, like, 15, 16,000 farmers' death every year because of land grabbing, because of it's inhumane that somebody would kill themselves over 300 rupees debt. It is not right, right? So, but what I want to bring to your mind is what happens to the women after their husbands die, right? They are saddled with the same debt. They will not be remarried, not because of some religious customs, because no other man wants to take the burden of the debt along with it. That's a ground reality. So the green revolution that happened in the 60s and the 70s, they incorporated irrigation systems. They incorporated things like GMO, insecticide and pesticides use. And I don't mean to sound facetious, but most of the time the pesticides are used by the farmers for their own suicide. So pesticides is being used to kill one of the species, us. So the agricultural sector in India is 75% women. India is an agricultural economy. And if you look at the sheer numbers, the poverty level in India, by definition, is about $1.90. There's 172 million people in poverty in India. That's half the size of the United States. And to talk about equity between America and India, it's an ignominy. They also earn only 70 cents on the dollar, just like the American women here. Not a good thing to be equated to, but there's equity there. So what I want to bring to the table is, these small insidious things, numerous land reforms. If you look into it, those are some of the reasons women cannot move forward in India, because of economic disparity. Because of the confluence of economy and ecology is women. You cannot talk about improvements in women unless you address the bottom line, money. No matter what you speak, it's very nice for me to speak poetically about the arts and everything else, because the basics are done. My children are taken care of. I have a job I can take care of. If you're working 2-3 jobs to make your ends meet, you don't have time to pursue the culture that India speaks of. Just not going to happen. So, UN Sustainable Development Goals, if you look at them, and I'm sure most of you do because I think I'm preaching to the choir, number 1, no poverty, no hunger, good health, like quality education. There's a reason why Grameen Bank gives microfinance loans to women. Because when you empower a woman, they inevitably go and help the family. Not that they're all men who go and drink. That's not true. I am quite confident, tinctured with probably arrogance, is because I had a father who supported me. I have men and lots of men who support me, and that makes me who I am. But that's part of biodiversity, right? You help each other out. So all of this, you cannot have a woman, like if a female farmer cannot support her farm, because of issues that are policy made, they will judge a farm by things like, yield and output. The yield is dangerous because the yield of a small farm will never equate to one from a big farm. And just by that definition, that entire farm is swept aside. I mean, that's how policies are made. If you want to help women, policies need to be addressed. That's the way you go about it, because most of the Sustainable Development Goals target women the most. A farmer who cannot grow her food, absolutely subject to poverty, cannot feed herself, cannot have good health. There's no question of college education, any kind of education for her kids. So they're all tied together. And so when we talk about identities transition, what can we do? I don't matter. What really matters, I take this opportunity to tell you about a woman who deserves your attention. She's the woman called Ela Bhatt. Has anyone heard of her? Yeah. Amazing. And I don't know her from Adam, but I troll the internet to find people who are deserving of our attention. So she runs and is the founder of SAWG, and she said it beautifully. I rarely ever read what I write because I assume everybody's literate here, but it behooves us to read this. Poverty is violence perpetuated with the consent of society. A society that is silent, that looks the other way in the face of poverty, is truly giving consent to exploitation, injustice, and war. Poverty strips away a person's dignity, humanity, and corrodes the human spirit. Economic basis is a fundamental need for human dignity. It's the unfortunate truth. So whatever can be done to address it, and in a myriad of ways, I take these opportunities to let you know of people like this. They're so deserving of publicity. And so I took this picture because, this is Loyola Jesuit University. And like I said, Pope is like a rock star environmentalist. So this woman doesn't need any introduction. It's me. I don't know who this woman is. I suspect people know of her too. The reason I bring this up, I think mentorship matters. I met her because my father was very involved in Rotary. Who knows what the lambent intelligence that was put into my head from watching her do service. And the importance to me was she was not Indian. She spent her life helping a generation of people that had nothing to do with the background. And that seed is slowly germinating in me about giving service to someone else, right? So if I have a chance, and through my work at Siemens, and I don't want to talk about it because there were slides afterwards, I love working for Siemens. Every time I do a project, I am an engineer fundamentally. Every time I do a project, Siemens allows me to invest their resources into bespoke projects that I like. And biodiversity conversation is it. Talking about seed banks, we have a whole history in India about conserving 9 seeds that talks about seed banking. There's a whole history of it. I don't want to go into it because you should find it out yourself. But biodiversity matters. We're all in this together. It does matter to find ways to address these land issues of climate change. They're all connected together. I'm very grateful for this opportunity, and I look forward to learning from everyone. Thank you.
It is now my great pleasure to invite Professor Hassan Akmal, who is the Director of Career Services and adjunct professor at Loyola University. He's the former CEO and president of Invitation Relief, a global non-governmental organization that focuses on forced migration and health. So we are coming round full circle back to education. So Professor Akmal.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Yeah. The food smells great. Kaushik, I have a hungry audience, so it's going to be a tough audience. Thank you very much, Baji, I say to Shweta for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. The courage of Shweta and the organizers, Dara, who's a TED Talk speaker in my book, and just all of you for being here. Just I congratulate you on your courage. I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of a couple different perspectives and a little bit kind of an insight into my own story. In his book, The Art of Happiness at Work, the Dalai Lama explores 3 buckets. The first bucket that he explores is the job bucket. And what he says is the job bucket is acquisition of resources, putting food on the table, and really getting your family to the next day. The second bucket he describes as the career bucket. And that bucket, he says, it's when it's not acquisition of resources being really the primary goal, but it's really advancement, prestige, recognition. And at first you might think that intuitively they are different. But what he argues is that the job bucket and the career bucket are quite different, are actually very similar, because in the end you have very limited control over both. And then the bucket that he really strives to encourages us to really strive for is the bucket of calling. And that's when work is so fundamentally aligned with what you love and your passion, that it's work that you would do for the work itself. When I think about the bucket of calling, I think about connecting passion to purpose, especially in my field as a director of career services. And I think about my career as a professional tennis player, as a chief executive officer for a not-for-profit and traveling the world. And I think about all the refugees and especially all the women and girls that I've met who could not connect their passion to purpose because they didn't have those rights, they didn't have those opportunities. And believe it or not, you would think I would have a ton of stories about some of those women or some of those girls that I met, and I do. But above all of them, the person that comes to mind is a South Asian woman, my mother. My father passed away when I was 11 years old. She was looking for a job for 2 years. We had, both my parents were actually, my mother was a biochem professor in South Asia. My father was an agricultural chemist, and my mother had also taught biochemistry. So she was looking for a job for about 2 years, and in order to make ends meet, she would sell flower decorations at the local swamp meet. My father's death completely changed my life as a first-generation person in the United States, as well as my younger sister and my older brother. We went from being above middle class to filing for bankruptcy. And when you think about the challenges that South Asian women face, abroad, not even getting into the refugee areas and things that I've worked in, but just here in the United States, and I look at my own family, I look at how the theme of the topic of my presentation, leaving nobody behind, my mother was one of those people that was left behind after the death of my father. It had changed her life, changed our life in a way where financially, I had 50 cents in my pocket, and I would maybe buy a chocolate milk and a cookie, and that was just how my life was changed. But in the community, in the stigmas and the labels that sort of resulted from my father's death, I think was what impacted my family the most. And what I mean by that is my mother was now a widow, and so we would go to a dinner party and she was unable to wear colorful clothes. And I would ask, why aren't you wearing the nice clothes? She said, nope, I'm a widow now. People are telling me I should move back to South Asia, I should sell the house, and things like that. So we talk about empowerment, and we talk about the ability to make choices, but then how society really forces you and prevents you, in some cases, to do those things. So, I think about the strength in decision-making. And so my mother, who was looking for a job for 2 years, had no luck. English wasn't her first language. It was quite difficult for her. My father had left behind a big truck. It was hailing one day, and a neighbor came over and said to my mom, you should really go interview for this job. It's a chemist position in Visalia, and we're from Central California. My mom said, how am I going to drive in the hail? How am I going to drive an hour away with this big truck, that I don't know how to drive a truck. But sure enough, the neighbor was able to convince her to get in the car and drive an hour. And sure enough, my mom interviewed for the job, and that was her job for the next 30 years. So we talk about, longevity is no longer 30 years, especially in career development these days. But when I asked my mom what motivated you to stay in a job for 30 years, she said it was almost an unspoken contract between the employer and myself. I would provide a lifetime of service. They would provide a lifetime of security. And for her ability to raise 3 children was overwhelmingly motivating for her. My story. So here's me in Afghanistan. Actually, a couple hours before I was almost kidnapped, I was mugged in Afghanistan while doing my practicum for Columbia University. Behind me, you can't really see, is about 5 million refugees. Women and children running away from the war, farmers. When I did focus groups, most of the women and girls I spoke to were asking me and begging me not to give them peanut butter, but to teach them how to make potatoes, to really teach them the tailoring skills and things like that, which was quite an experience for me. So really my message is that change really begins with you. my inspiration. I was a professional tennis player traveling around the world, and I came across this little boy who's cross-eyed, and I wrote a poem about him and submitted it in my statement of purpose to Columbia University, where I ended up doing my degree in. And he just really followed me around everywhere and really just inspired me to really pursue public health. This brings me to India. About several years ago, you'll see big line of people, physical therapists, occupational therapists. One woman at the bottom, she was actually one woman running the entire center, rehabilitation center of over 100 handicapped, disabled children, autistic kids. One woman with just incredible amount of courage while her husband was away in the military. And on the right, you see a teacher who was actually teaching multiple subjects, including geography, to the kids. Tsunami camps. This is tsunami camps after the tsunami, and blind kids singing, and really this rehabilitation center in India was highly neglected by the government and by NGOs, just because they didn't really have the funds to really invest in wheelchairs and things like that. And so we set up different kind of programs, very micro enterprise sort of concept. There was a lot of stigmas, especially coming to when it came to deaf children. And it's funny, on my way over here, I was in the taxi, and right when I sat down, I heard a little, audio that said, if you're visually impaired, tap the screen 3 times. And I was like, wow, that's really nice. I had never really realized that before. But they didn't have those kinds of resources or things, pieces of support. And even autistic kids, for example, I had mothers coming to me saying that, hey, the entire society has said that my child has a curse, and I'm, unable to go to any sort of social gathering whatsoever. And these are the kind of challenges that they faced. I wanted to kind of tackle a little bit, what it means to live in that stigma, and also disability, the concept of disability. Here's me in a couple of tsunami camps. I was an athlete ambassador to Right to Play, which is an organization that focuses on sport for development. So I had posters and things like that, and one of the reasons why I think I was almost kidnapped in Afghanistan, because they thought I was this very famous person. Real quickly, Jack Chen, you may have heard, is somebody who is blind but works for Google Chrome, and is just really somebody who really struck me when I started sort of exploring the social model of disability and kind of looking at some of the gender issues and things, especially among disabled children. This girl is Neha. She's actually deaf, and she's dancing to the vibrations of sound. So really looking at social norms, using a social norms lens to really track a girl or woman's pathway to empowerment. But I mean, she blew me away, and it reminds me of the performance that we had today. It didn't stop her from performing and making a really strong statement. And so I just encourage you all to really think about, are we really enabling, or are we labeling when it comes to disabled populations, vulnerable populations? The kids that I worked with, for example, the audience said we couldn't communicate with so-and-so because they said, she's deaf. And so I brought them on stage and had them ask them what their name is and things like that. And in a matter of minutes, they were able to communicate their name, where they were from, the age, and things like that. So really tackling those social norms is really where you want to kind of start. Can be overcome with love. We've heard that theme kind of a little bit earlier. This is love in sign language. Mohan's an actor. He's also deaf. Just other examples, and this is a young girl who asked me for their autograph, and instead of giving my autograph, I asked her for her autograph. So really challenging the norms. And another deaf boy who, living in a small shelter, but give him a camera, and he was just a natural photographer. So have fun, believe in the key message of empowerment, but really understand what empowerment means. Are we holding people back by labeling them? When you think of girlhood, when you think of womanhood, also think of humanhood. And this is the last 3 takeaways I want to give you. Thank you very much.
So, what a great note to end on with the inspiring stories from Akmal. from Hassan. I am going to invite the panelists to come upstairs. It is to come and take a seat. And while they're coming and taking a seat, I want them to think about one sentence, an action sentence that you want the audience to think about based on your work and your experience. And we'll do this till 12:15. We'll do questions till 12:15 before we go to lunch. So let me invite the panelists to come up. And again, I encourage them to think about one action sentence that they want the audience to do as they leave the conference. And in the meantime, I'll be calling on the audience for their questions. We'll have enough time for maybe a few questions, and then you can also speak with the panelists afterwards during lunch. Hassan left with these words about, it's not just about womanhood and girlhood, but it's about humanhood. And we often forget that, being a woman and girl also means being human. It's often something that doesn't always get talked about. So I want to sort of have you sort of leave here and think about, well, we are human, whether we're girls or women. So let me start with Catherine. What's the one sentence that you would ask people to do as they leave here?
Being engaged at any level of passion you can have.
Thank you. Colleen?
I think people should push for more diversity in Indian food available in Chicago.
Well said, well said. Marcia?
Anyone want to throw me a lifeline?
Well, why don't you pass and then I'll come back to you. Anne?
Find your voice. And I talked about mentorship, but look into coaching, because that brings the best out of you.
Craig?
When we're thinking about the interventions that we want to provide, also think about how you're going to pay for it when you're doing it so it's sustainable.
Hassan?
I would say just, talk to a South Asian woman, talk to a South Asian girl, talk to somebody who is disabled and ask them if they consider themselves disabled. So changing your attitude and changing your perceptions.
I would firmly request, read an author. His name is E.O. Wilson. He's like the god of biodiversity. He's poetic. As an engineer, I would rather say he's a poet who's got statistics. E.O. Wilson, any book of his. Last one was called Half Earth. I beseech you to read that one. Thank you.
Thanks, Shoma. Seema?
Yes, be the ambassador for women and girls' empowerment.
It is now your turn. I'm looking for questions from the audience. Yes. Yes, please ask your question. Please state who you are.
I'm Mahima, and I'm just finishing up my PhD, and my question is for Catherine and Amy, and I found your work very interesting. And I was especially interested in your last slide of May Eve, where you're talking about performance on the menstrual cycle. And what I wanted to know, coming from a South Asian background and working as a historian, I find the whole question of menstruation to be taboo, and it's very difficult to come to any direct quotes on it. So what I wanted to ask was that when you were listening to this, listening to her work and talking to her and about her performance, what did you see in terms of the gender stereotype? How did the general audience listen to her work?
So, Catherine?
First of all, they didn't know where they were going to be when they saw our work, and this is what I found interesting in Burma, Myanmar. It's young and elderly women and artists are engaging the audience in a village, in a city, at any level, creating with scratch a possibility for understand the word differently and changing the word with no word taboo. But in doing it, the ginger beverage, they were exchanging, all the women knew. And little by little, the conversation started around the performance. And then she was extremely good at having people taking photos and posting on the web. So now you go on the web, and it's really more now starting to really being an interesting conversation, which never happened before.
Thank you. Next question. Yes, please.
My name is Prerna Singh. I happen to be very privileged to be sister. Elder sister to Shweta, but today she makes me proud of all that she's accomplished. And it was amazing. I'm so glad I'm here. And my question is to Marcia. And it is a mouthful, right? South Asian, Muslim, and then you have 84 American girls, right? And coming from a corporate background, a lot of it is about how you label something and how you talk about it. So when you have these many identities associated and you talk to women, how do you address it to make sure that they're actually able to embrace, but yet not make it confusing to someone else?
Good question. Marcia?
So you're talking about the insider-outsider, sort of like the insider recognizing those pieces of her identity, yes, and the outsider kind of factoring all of those in. And I think that's a great question, because I think the insider, may not even consciously kind of think of those labels, and of course that's tempting. We all know like the ABCD, right? American born, confused Daisy, and then somebody says FG from Gujarat, and then it can just go on and on, right? Because you're sort of parsing, like somebody says in the community, oh, there was a mixed marriage, a Hyderabadi married a Punjabi, right? So, I mean, we can parse it down to the nth level. Of course, many of those things in the diaspora context may become more or less salient to people, right? Like those little more micro ethnic pieces or whatever don't make sense anymore. Or even among Muslims, for example, some of the things back home that really got people riled up, like are you a Deobandi or a Brelvi or so on, like here people don't know what that is, right? So it's like, if you become more ethnic, if you embrace more and more like the South Asian piece of your identity, are you going to start bringing those things in? Or is there something empowering about letting those go? Now, I suppose if you talk about the outsider position, you could say that some of those are things that would remain obscure to an outsider, right? So then you have to think about the outsider gaze. Like, let's say we were doing a survey among South Asians, are you a Brelvi or a Deobandi? Or, this, so you're actually almost like creating or reinforcing those elements of identity that might have disappeared. So it's an interesting paradox, right? Like at what point information and distinction helps you be more critical, and at what point it sort of reminds me of the, the stuff about the British census in India, right? That everybody and maybe this is romanticizing, right? That everybody in India was kind of getting along and being part of one big thing and crossing boundaries and being fluid across Hindu, Muslim, linguistic, and then once you start taking a census and saying, yeah, but you've got to define what you are, then it actually may reinforce those identities. So, I mean, it is an interesting paradox.
Thank you, Marcia. Susan, you had a question?
I did. It was actually from Hassan, and it was about, it's a little bit, it's not about women, it's about disability, but I suppose because it has to do with empowerment, it's relevant. And it may not be a fair question because it wasn't clear to me from your presentation how much work you did in the disability community in the United States. But, I think from our U.S.-centric view, I will speak, I think, we tend to see ourselves as being very, supportive of the disability community, and yet the same way that we impose an identity, I think your point was, you know, we label people as being disabled, and in some way we take something away from them doing that. So my question is, you know, in terms of how people were treated, how well they were integrated into the community, people who had a disability, do you think that the United States is more or less empowering than what you experienced in your work in South Asia?
This is a great question. So most of my work was in Indonesia, Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, and Colombia, South America. And then in some parts of the U.S., South Central Los Angeles, one of the the most medically underserved area in the nation, and in some parts of New York. I believe very passionately in focus groups, and so really talking to the individuals themselves. And so when I show like those videos of, if you want to see Jack Chen's video, I mean this blind person has run marathons, has climbed mountains, and in one of his interviews they ask him, "Do you consider yourself disabled or handicapped?" And he said, "Actually, I don't." And he can, it's like certain parts of the brain are so much more enhanced. And even I saw that in India with a lot of the deaf girls and women there. They're just so much stronger in so many other areas that it'll blow you away. So when you think about sort of the U.S. model and the whole model of disability here, what in my focus groups in the U.S., what they say to me, the individuals themselves, is that, you know, it's nice to have a ramp at a hospital, but if there's somebody there to help me walk up the stairs and help sort of strengthen my effort to do that, that would be something we would appreciate more. So they don't like sort of the labeling, the signs. They don't like to be considered sort of impaired or any of that, because they feel like that they can do all those things despite. But it takes them a little bit longer, perhaps, right? So I do think there's something there when it comes to looking at the U.S. model. Not even to mention sort of the psychosocial or the mental issues that go along with that, which was one of my areas of research, the psychosocial impact of conflict on children in Afghanistan. But so I think that we absolutely have to change it. I think that there's, you know, it's empathy. It's almost like, you know, I look at career services programs. It's the student-driven feedback that's really shaping the programs. It's the employer feedback that's shaping the programs. And I think a lot of times, you know, ourselves or physicians will kind of make those assumptions and create policies and procedures that may not be in the best interest.
Thank you so much. I think we're going to have to stop the questions there. You will have an opportunity, hopefully, to mingle with them and ask them your questions personally. But wow, what a range of topics, what a great diversity of thoughts and ideas. You will have a chance to delve in some of these issues much deeper today. But please join me in thanking all of our panelists this morning. And what a privilege it has been to be here. Thank you so much.